California, and then I guess he was it the University of Rochester or somewhere?
Buffalo, I believe.
Buffalo, yeah, Buffalo.
How did Houdry have the organization, or how did he have Houdry organized in the 1940s? Was it rigid, or?
Well, Eugene Houdry had a group who would follow him around, but as I said before, he sort of expected the lab to enthusiastically develop what he was doing at the time. And sometimes this was good in the early days, but when we had other obligations, it became a little bit of a problem. And we had to divide our effort a little bit to satisfy our customers as well as keep Eugene Houdry happy. He would come into the lab and be very friendly with the people he would greet. I remember one time he went down to the old pilot plant, and he didn't have his, this was during the war, he didn't have his proper identification. And the old codger that was on the gate wouldn't let him in. Well, Eugene Houdry didn't reprimand him for it. You know, he appreciated the fellows sticking to the rules, and so he was not upset by this. But he sort of laughed at himself for that occurrence. Eugene Houdry lacked some technical background, but he got some good technical people around him, and he learned how to utilize those technical skills that way. And as I said, well, back in the days in France, he had this French chemist working for him. And they were trying to get more gasoline from cracking in these very preliminary experiments. They had a clay that they were using, and a clay catalyst that they were using, and he had the idea that nickel would be wonderful for producing a good catalyst. Well, nickel's pretty strong, but he always had the idea of nickel. Well, anyway, this chemist was under the gun to get results. And one time it became known that he had sort of fudged the results. He had put in some of the gasoline product that sort of made the results look better. Well, Eugene Houdry's response to this, as I heard it, was that, oh, he was just trying to put in something that would show the other molecules what had to be done. So he didn't he didn't castigate the poor chemist, but he sort of excused him. But Eugene Houdry, of course, when he was in effect pushed out by the organization that had taken his name, went on and started the effort on catalytic mufflers and the old oxycat. And of course that he first worked on catalysts that would be effective in a mine situation where they didn't have tetraethyl lead and whatnot, where they could operate a gasoline engine without lead, which was a bad poison for the catalyst, and he developed some catalyst for that. So he continued to be an innovator, and even later he, of course, went into the cancer research effort, too. And in later years, he had the idea that if oxygen was good for regenerating a catalyst, it would be good for regenerating the human body, so he used an oxygen tent to sleep in at times. So he was always thinking in forward terms, and that made it interesting. So.
Well, was he working on the platinum oxidation catalyst to Houdry, or did he dream this up out of necessity with Oxycat?
There had been some work done at Houdry before he left the Houdry organization, and he, in fact, as I recall, some catalysts were made for him at Oxycat at the Houdry labs, but he had some early patents on the Oxycat in his own right that developed. Of course, some of the people who had been around him at Houdry went with him to the Oxycat effort, and so they developed the platinum catalyst there. He was more interested in the cracking catalyst while he was at catalytic development or Houdry. The reforming catalysts were sort of, as I remember it, sort of a separate effort that, of course, Alec Mills and Alex Oblad had a great deal to do with, and Harry Millikan and many others. Burt Farkas was a wonderful person to work with. I always got along so well with Burt. I remember the time in Paris when my wife and I said to him something about we were going down to the Lido that night and to see something in the nightlife in Paris. Burt, with his head back, he sort of looked and said, "You be careful, they will roll you."
Well, how did Farkas come to Houdry?
Well, I'm a little, I guess, in the organic end of things, really. They wanted to branch out into the organic field more, and they brought Burt in to really spur that effort on and do much for that organic effort. And this was part of the development of the urethane catalysts and the amines and all that sort of thing that were quite separate from the inorganic catalysts that had been the mainstay in earlier years. But when the products of organic chemistry became of interest to the Houdry organization, and that was how Burt came into us.
So someone at Houdry knew him outside and invited
Of course, there was a knowledge of people in the Philadelphia area through the Catalyst Club that meant that we knew what was going on in different labs there. I remember one fellow who followed Burt from his former employment was a very effective man at Houdry, and another one that I ran into at Matthew Bishop. I worked for Matthew Bishop for some 4 years after I left the Houdry organization. I worked on catalysts there, on precious metals catalysts, on activated charcoal, and also on alumina. We did some work on automobile catalysts there too. Although I had been sort of independent of that effort at the Houdry organization, there was still a little bit of no problem to be sure I didn't divulge secrets. Of course, I worked for Matthew Bishop for some 4 years, and then had a call one time from the West Coast. Actually, somebody was looking for somebody. Oh dear. Was working for Matthew Bishop, and actually my boss there had let me go to a technical conference in Los Angeles, ACS meeting, and I was really going under their sponsorship. So even though this call came in from the West Coast, I said, well, I'm not going to talk to you while I'm out there. But when I got back from the meeting, I got a call again, and they were looking for somebody with the background that I had in cracking catalysts, and so I wound up going down to work for Bill Hettinger in Ashland Oil, and I certainly appreciated the opportunity to continue in my field of catalyst preparation there at testing at Ashland Oil until I retired last year, a year ago in January.
Now, when did you go first to Bishop and then to Ashland?
Well, let's see,
roughly.
I took early retirement at the Houdry. After Air Products took it over, they became less interested in the catalyst end of things, and so it was better for me to take that early retirement. Actually, I continued as a consultant for the Houdry organization for several years while I was working for Matthew Bishop on an entirely separate basis. In other words, I wasn't working on cracking catalysts or anything at Matthew Bishop, so there was no conflict. And so that was 1974, it must have been, because I worked for 4 years at Matthew Bishop and then went to Ashland in 1978. As I say, retired a year ago last January.
Well, what was it about Houdry that made people willing to follow him around and to follow him while he was at Houdry? Is there any characteristic that caused this?
Well, Houdry was a very interesting fellow. He had ideas, obviously, that were new, and he had the enthusiasm to encourage people to follow up on his ideas. And as I say, he got the right technical staff to support him, and it made a good team. That little example of his going and watching the operators on a Saturday afternoon. Well, here's the big boss down there, and these operators are on the unit. Well, it was a family sort of an organization. They were enthusiastic. Here the big boss come down to watch me work, you know. That was great. And of course, as the organization got bigger, this became more difficult, but he looked ahead on some important factors, and that business of jumping into the aviation gasoline when the war effort needed it, that was, everybody enthusiastically followed that, of course. That was
What happened if you didn't follow up something that he suggested?
Well, you found yourself doing it anyhow. But as I say, it became a little difficult for the fellows who would work with him till 10 or 11 at night and then have to be in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. But they did develop a separate staff that allowed that to work out. Sometimes he would try to overlap a little bit, but that was his close advisors would show him the advisability of keeping our customers happy.
Who were his close advisors
at the Farragut time? And I'm afraid I'm a little...
what was Oblat doing then?
Oblat hadn't come until later years. Actually, Alec Mills was there before Oblat had come. I guess Oblat and Heinemann and one other came down from up in New Jersey at the same time, as I recall. And that must have been late 40s, wasn't it? Something like that.
Well, was Oblat the one who then took over as research manager or whatever when Houdry left, or was that the case?
Yes. I'm a little... the timing and whatnot's a little hard for me to recall, but we had... Alec Mills was research director, and of course Oblat came in as a leader. He was certainly a wonderful person to work for. I don't recall the exact switches. Of course, Kirkbride was there. Also,
Burt Davis.
Hausman and Ted Burtis came in after Kirkbride went to Sun Oil and, as head of the laboratories. There were other people who came. Incidentally, one I haven't mentioned that is of interest was there in the early years was Auburn Wheeler, who was very well known in the pore systems and whatnot. And
how would you describe him?
well, he worked pretty much on his own, separately. He had some difficulty in later years while he was at Houdry, physically, but he was a great contributor.
How did he come to Houdry?
I don't remember. I don't remember how. It seems to me he came from the West Coast. I'm not sure how that came about.
Was he a very outgoing person, or rather personality?
I thought of him as a fairly quiet person. He was enthusiastic about his the work that he did, but at the time I knew him, he was not, I would say, very outgoing, although he would enter into the arguments and conversation in great enthusiasm, and still I felt that he sort of worked more alone at the time I knew him there.
Well, how about Grosset?
Von Grosse, he was one of the entourage around Eugene Houdry, and he was sort of an independent kind of guy. I remember, again, I didn't have direct contact with him very much, except there was some metal catalyst, and he was using he was doing some work on coke as a catalyst, as I remember, something to that effect. Of course, he went on to work on the cancer research downtown in the hospital in Philadelphia, and that was at the instigation of Eugene Houdry, as I recall. That was one of Houdry's separate enthusiasms, as I recall it.
Well, now, he came to Houdry from UOP, or?
I believe so. Just as Farragher. Farragher had come from UOP too.
And how would you describe Von Grosse as a person?
Well, I don't recall very much contact with him, except that he was fairly intense in what he did. He would follow a project down very enthusiastically, and I think more independently than some of the others did. I don't have too good a recollection on Von Grosse.
And Harold Shallop.
Harold was sort of fun to work with. He would and get his group to encourage them to go on, and he'd find them at a coffee break or something like that. He'd come up and sort of josh them on. He'd say, "Work, work, work, time to get to work." And Harold was very effective in getting things done. He had a lot on the ball. Again, that was a little bit separate effort from what I was working on, so I didn't have direct contact, only in the separate effort that he was working.
And what sort of a person was Hendon?
Jerry Hendon was a fairly serious sort of guy. He did a great deal to get the analytical lab to produce properly, and he headed up the analytical lab. Actually, as I recall it, he was instrumental in developing methods for analysis that were quite innovative, and he was a hard worker. Some people had a little hard time with Jerry, but he was sincere and tried to do a good job, and he did. Incidentally, my wife, before we were married, was looking for a summer job. She was going to the University of Pennsylvania and studying chemistry. And she saw this ad in the paper from the Catalytic Development Corporation. They said no summer work. Well, she went and applied anyway, and she got a job. So she worked in the analytical lab and turned up analyzing some samples for the catalyst lab, including samples that I submitted. So there was the little Houdry paper that came out was a little bit hard on her when the announcement of her wedding came about, saying that Cowan catches Cornelius. So but they had a picture of us in the Houdry News of our wedding picture.
Well, now, did the family concept extend beyond the workplace? Did these people socialize together a lot?
Going bowling was a great get-together. I mean, the fellows would go and bowl enthusiastically in the bowling league, and the fellows and the operators and the technical people and the bosses would go down and bowl and have fun. And this was a wonderful way of relaxing that people participated in. I remember I won a turkey one time bowling, and I took it home to Ann just after we were married. Here it still had the feathers and everything on it. She wasn't very enthusiastic about that. But we would have dances every year that we would go to, and we had golf tournaments that people would enjoy, and the old Houdry organization. And there was a camaraderie that went with that was very good. Unfortunately, after Air Products took it over, it lost that family sort of feeling, and people didn't have that. I know our foreman out in the catalyst lab was a real enthusiastic guy, and he used to contribute greatly to the performance of the laboratory. He would get in there, he'd keep the boys doing heat treats and washes and whatnot in great order, and he'd josh people along to get them enthusiastic about doing a good job. And he had a way of really enthusiastically, Ken West was his name, and he was not technically trained, but he got the idea very fully of enthusiastically working for Harry Milliken and for me and for the others in the catalyst lab. But a year or so after it got taken over, I remember one time I said something to him about work needing to be done. He says, "I just work here." Well, that was sad sort of commentary, but in contrast, the family organization that the Houdry had become was quite a lot of enthusiasm that everybody appreciated and liked to put out and do things that would help the company worthwhile.
Were there apparent changes as it went from Houdry to Oblat to Mills, or did the lab stay pretty much the same?
Oh, there were some variations. Of course, when we took on more of the organic flavor, that changed things quite a bit. And there was the independent group, and Burt Farkas was heading up one group there in the organic area with Weichman and others who were very effective in organic chemistry. The effort I was more used to was with Jim McAvoy and of course John Merker. John Merker came a year after I did. He became head of R&D eventually, and was more in the running of things, and contributed greatly to the operations. I remember when John Merker first came, he and his wife came up in this old two-door car from down in Tennessee, and they had to, when they came to hills, turn around and go backwards up the hill. They make it up the hill with that car. I remember coming into work one morning. I came in on Chester Road, heading for Chester on the way to Marcus Hook, and I found this automobile with only 3 wheels sitting in the middle of the road, nobody in it. And I recognized it as John Merker's car. Here he is down in the ravine trying to recover his wheel that had come off. He subsequently bought a Cadillac that used to switch back and forth to another Cadillac. So he progressed from that car.
Well, what was Houdry's lifestyle?
Well, Eugene Houdry was a fairly he lived on the main line, and his son was a golfer, and he was a golfer. He as I recall it, there was always the opportunity for getting out into the into things, but Eugene Houdry really was enthusiastic about what new things he could develop, so he would fairly regularly come down and watch what was going on, and see that things were followed up that he had an interest in. He was, as I recall, he drove a pretty nice car and maintained, always looked very well dressed, and kept a good he was very fine-looking person, and always was well groomed, and always wanted to help people where he could.
Did he interact with the leaders of other companies such as UOP and other competitors, or was he very much alone in the business world?
Well, when the idea of fluidized bed came along, there was an offer to have Houdry participate. As I recall it, Houdry refused. He didn't want to, and of course, the fluid bed outstripped everything that Houdry ever did, and so maybe that was a mistake, but he did not feel comfortable with that approach, and so he pushed away from that opportunity right from the beginning.
What was your most satisfying accomplishment while you were at Houdry?
Well, I guess we had some great new things with the chemistry of the silicates that I felt was fairly comprehensive. Somehow that never got published, although we did, it was referred to in papers at various times, including one at an ACS meeting in New York, but we never got it published. I think one of the main things that I recall, though, is that work on reforming catalysts, which I felt very comfortable about. At the Paris conference, Alex Mills actually gave the paper, but I was one of the main contributors along with the others who backed us up. Saul Weller, of course, was another one in that group, and I felt that was a great achievement, that we brought together the chemistry of reforming in a way that was useful to industry. And I think that's the main thing that I recall. Although I enjoyed all kinds of catalysts. My chromium aluminum catalyst, I have some patents in that field that I guess I have some 20-odd U.S. patents from the Houdry organization and a number from Ashland Oil, that, and many foreign patents that have my name on them. One I always felt I should try and do myself, since Houdry didn't want to do anything with it. That was to encapsulate heat absorbing material in an envelope, sort of, to make it useful for air conditioning and heating, where you could cheaply store the heat in little encapsulated pellets, sort of, where it would be easy to get heat transfer to take the heat of the sun or whatever and then take it back out again. But that never got off the ground, so I don't know what happened there.
Well, mentioning the reforming paper, another reforming paper was the one on bifunctional
yes, dual
catalyst.
function. Dual function.
How did that work come about?
Well, as I recall, Alec Mills and Oblad both had a great deal to do with that, and Harry Millikan. They saw that the acid function that was required and the dehydrogenation, dehydrocyclization function had to be in close juxtaposition for anything to be accomplished. And one thing that Jerry Hindon had done, incidentally, was studying oxygen oxygen movement in a solid. And Alex Oblat, I remember, was very enthusiastic about this, where I think it was Jerry Hindon that showed that the oxygen way within the solid of an oxide catalyst at temperatures of normal operation, that is 900 or higher temperatures, was quite mobile. I remember Alex Oblat expressed it in saying that it was just as though you had a brick wall with loose bricks, and you took another brick and just jammed it like that, and that other brick would just go out, and the brick would go right into the wall. I don't think people entirely accepted that, but the research that was done at Houdry certainly led to the conclusion that that oxygen was not by any means just fixed in place, that it could move. And this meant that there was mobility within the system at operating temperatures that might mean that dual function catalysts would perform more effectively. There was still the necessity for an ordering of the system, but that there could be movement within the catalyst. It showed that the old idea that a catalyst didn't participate in reaction wasn't at all true, of course, but that even the solid catalyst was perhaps not as solid as we had thought in the past.
Well, how did they show this oxygen was mobile? By oxygen isotopes or chemical analysis?
Yes.
Or oxygen isotopes? At that time, Sciapetta was also working on the nickel silica alumina bifunctional catalyst.
Yes.
Was there interaction between Atlantic and Houdry, or?
Well, there'd be meetings at Gordon conferences where there'd be a certain amount of information given out both ways, and this would urge everybody on to do some more studies.
Well, another person on that bifunctional paper was Heinemann. How did he come to Houdry?
Heinz Heinemann was a very enthusiastic guy that, incidentally, I just saw him in the last year or so out in California. He still works with graduate students out at Berkeley, and continues to be an enthusiastic catalyst man, as he used to be. He would see the value of work that was being done and bring it together in a way that was useful and effective, and certainly made great contributions at Houdry.
And what about interaction with Sun, which was just down the street from the lab?
Well, we didn't have a close laboratory interaction, but there was work done in both labs where it was sort of complementary. Um, they kept pretty independent, really, of the Houdry organization. During the war, we used to go down and have lunch at the Sun Oil cafeteria. We had a station wagon that would go down regularly. So we would see those fellows down there, talk to them. But the laboratories worked independently, really, pretty much. The property on which the Houdry building stood was rented for 99 years from the Sun Oil Company. I understood that building was to be bulldozed down a year or so ago. I haven't learned whether that happened or not.
How would you compare working at Houdry to working for a somewhat larger company, Ashland?
Well, I don't think it's so different because the working at in the research department, you still aren't interacting with a great many more people. Now there's a refinery at Ashland Oil, which and we get into the engineering department activities to some extent too, but it's not a very different situation as far as I'm concerned, because you're working with technical people who go to the catalyst meetings and whatnot, just as we did at Houdry. It's not that different, because the research effort is somewhat compartmented, and so it's still sort of the same kind of situation. But I've enjoyed my work in catalysis all my professional career, and certainly it's been an interesting effort. I remember Hugh Stott Taylor at Princeton teaching us about hydrogen catalysis and whatnot back in the 30s. And
this was while you were a student?
Yes.
Did you have a course to Taylor?
Yes.
How would you describe him?
Well, he was a real enthusiastic fellow. I didn't have much direct contact with him, but he was very intense, very he would teach in a way that was very effective. He could develop on the board what he needed to get across in a clear way, and I certainly appreciated that opportunity to work with him. And of course we had a fellow that's now at Utah, was physical chemistry.
Iring?
Iring. He taught us physical chemistry. I remember he used to write across the board these equations that would continue on the next line and the next line. I couldn't keep up with him very well. I enjoyed that course very much. I certainly very Iring.
Now, when Taylor was teaching, did he bring in lots of notes, or did he
Yes, yes, he'd bring notes.
and was very organized?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, he was well organized. He had references that he could cite just right down the line.
And were his lectures very formal, or was
Yes,
there discussion?
Fairly formal. We had another Taylor, chemistry too.
Was it his brother, or?
No, I don't remember. But I remember they were in the chemistry building. They were doing experiments with heavy water and separating water. They had in the stairwell, they had this tall piece of equipment. We didn't exactly know what was going on, but they were separating heavy water.
Was the course you took from Taylor just catalysis, or was this within physical chemistry?
It was catalysis, yes.
And what kind of exams did he give?
I don't really remember. I managed to get through all right, but I think I came out with a 3.
But would you say they were very difficult, or?
Yes, yes.
And did he discuss them with you, or you just got your grade? And...
No, we just got our grade.
And hiring?
Of course, I was in the engineering department, chemical engineering department, but we had the benefit of the chemistry courses in the chemistry building.
And what kind of a lecture was hiring?
It was something to follow. You really had to be on your toes. He really went like wildfire.
And what do you recall about his personality?
I remember the grad students had a party for him at Christmas one time, and they kidded him about his holes in liquid theory, and they made up a parody which he took pretty well, I thought, because it of course it implied that something about the bubbles in beer, and you know, not for hiring.
So they were comparing, he was Mormon.
Yeah, yeah.
And so...
But he took it very well, I thought.
Was Turkevich there at that time?
Yes, yes he was. He was there. No, I think he must have come later. I knew him at Princeton, but I'm a little puzzled in thinking back. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he was a graduate student in 37 or so.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
And what did you work on in research at Princeton?
Natural gasoline. A natural gasoline plant. Another fellow and I wrote a thesis on developing a natural gasoline plant with all the necessary sorbents and distillation and whatnot equipment that went with it, as I recall. I did do research in synthetic rubber. And I had a assistantship in my graduate year from a rubber company in Trenton. And I remember I worked on trying to combine synthetic rubber with raw rubber. And my experiments were kind of difficult. I had some problems with that equipment. I remember working in the lab one time. I was alone. I shouldn't have been where I was. And I had fairly heavy glasses at the time, which was fortunate, because I mixed some things that spattered hot rubber onto me and my glasses. And I remember I took the glasses like this and flung them across the room, got under the sink in a hurry. I came out all right, but I had some pock marks on my face for a little while. But it showed me the advisability of having safety glasses, all right.
When the courses you took from Iring and Taylor, these were graduate courses?
No, this was undergraduate.
Undergraduate?
Well, wait a minute. I guess it may have been in my graduate work. Yeah.
Was there interaction between the faculty and the student then?
Department and then chemical engineering. Elgin was my professor and actually he wasn't the one that called me though. It was Jack. We had Jack Whitwell and Wilhelm.
He was there at that time?
Richard Wilhelm was the one that called me.
Okay, he consulted for Mobile.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Did Taylor or Iring interact much with the students, or was this more like the German?
In the chemical engineering department, really. We were in a separate laboratory building, which was an old, run-down building. They built new buildings since there, but I remember we set up a graduate year at Christmas time. We had a big old lathe that we did work on, and we decided to bring in a Christmas tree. So we took the chuck for the lathe and used it for a Christmas tree support.
What was your most frustrating thing at Houdry?
At Houdry?
Yes. Source of your biggest frustration?
Oh, golly. Well, I guess I don't remember it in that way, except we had to I really had a pretty good experience at Houdry for the most. I guess the frustrating part was when the new organization took over and they became less enthusiastic about catalysts. That was the frustrating part, and I was able to get out of that situation into something more interesting for me, so it worked out all right.
Well, in your years, who would you classify as the most impressive person you've run into in catalysis?
I'd say Alex Mills. I really think he contributed greatly to all sorts of aspects of catalysis. Not only the preparation, but the testing and the characterization of catalysts. I say that even though there were special aspects that Oblad contributed greatly to, and people like Weller were very thorough in, but and Harry Millikan was very innovative, but to my mind somewhat narrower than Alec Mills. And I think Alec, he worked during the war on synthetic rubber, a method of a continuous process for making synthetic rubber. I wasn't involved in that, but this was a real tough job. They were, of course, Houdry had the butadiene process for making butadiene with chromium alumina catalyst, and I think this was one of Eugene Houdry's ideas to make synthetic rubber in a continuous manner, as I recall it. But Alec Mills headed up that effort and did a real bang-up job on it. So here was a quite separate aspect of research, but very effective. But he kept under his wing things in the organic field as well as the different catalysts like cobalt molybdenum. I worked on many cobalt molybdenum catalysts too, and nickel aluminum, platinum aluminum reforming catalysts, chromium aluminum dehydrocatalyst. We always had interesting things to do with Alex around. I felt.
Sitting on the road.
But you all don't have here,
Section over.
Yeah, I don't we occasionally do it. Like the last time we had it done, Alabama Rice from Penn State, Ashland paid his way.
wow, some of them.
But Ashland still paid his way. Are you recording this?
Hey, it's in color. It's in color.
My tie-in straight? No.
Oh, gosh.
If we could get started, have a couple of brief announcements before we get to the main part of our program tonight. One is that we are pretty well set for the final 3 talks for this year. One in January is still tentative. It's going to be held in Charleston, West Virginia, sponsored by Union Carbide. They are having somebody from Bruce Gates' laboratory give a presentation. They're supposed to are having a speaker come to Cincinnati. It will be probably the 3rd Wednesday, which is the 18th of March. And they're going to have a speaker on solid-state NMR.
First and seconds in terms of what's